Have you ever sat across from a patient who knows what to do, but just can't seem to follow through? Maybe they say, I just love food too much, or I've tried everything and nothing works for me. On paper, we'd label them as non-compliant. But what if it's something deeper? I'm Colleen, a PA, dietitian, and your nutrition mentor. Welcome to the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast, your guide to giving better nutrition advice. Today, we're digging into one of the most overlooked barriers to health behavior change, limiting beliefs. These are the subtle but powerful narratives patients tell themselves, stories that keep them stuck, discouraged, and doubting whether real change is even possible for them. My guest today is Emily, a registered dietitian and mindset coach who helps people connect the dots between what they believe and how they behave. In this conversation, she shares why excuses aren't just laziness. They're often clues to deeper struggles like perfectionism, comparison, or fear of failure. We'll learn how to help patients reframe thoughts like, I can't stick to healthy eating, into empowering beliefs that they can actually build on. And you'll learn a simple acronym that maps how beliefs lead to actions and how you can use it to reverse engineer lasting change. Emily even shares a genius way to use ChatGPT, yep, you heard that right, to help patients reframe their thinking in between visits. So whether you're tired of giving the same old advice or you want your patient to leave the visit actually believing that they can change, you're going to love this episode. So thanks for bringing me along on your walk, your commute, or whatever part of the day you've carved out for this. Now enjoy my conversation with Emily. Emily, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this topic. I cannot wait to learn from you today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Colleen. I'm excited too. I'm excited to get started.
Oh, yes. I love this topic. And so I first just want to get an overarching kind of definition of exactly what are limiting beliefs, and then how do you think they affect our patients?
So if you've ever had thoughts like, I can't stick with exercise because I don't have time, or healthy eating is too hard, or even I love food too much to lose weight, those are your limiting beliefs. You might also think of these as excuses someone's making when you're talking to them when they don't follow through or they can't follow through with their goals. And really, excuses kind of feels like a dirty word when you've been in this space for too long, but I think that's actually a good way to start looking for them. When you're talking to your clients, what are the common excuses that you hear over and over again? I think they can be unconscious or conscious, but they always end up becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. And then on a deeper level, these excuses or limiting beliefs, they tend to speak to common things that people deal with, like overarching things like perfectionism or fear of failure or self-worth or comparison. So the excuse is like the headlight, and then looking underneath is a way to see what that person is struggling with even deeper.
Oh, I love that analogy. What a great way to explain that. How do you think limiting beliefs affect our patients?
When it comes to patients, these limiting beliefs tend to keep them stuck in whatever cycle that they find themselves in. So they can't lose the weight, or they end up with yo-yo weight loss. They can't stick with a workout routine. Maybe they even see like a family history and say, well, this didn't work for my parents. This doesn't work for my sister. So why would it work for me?
I think a lot of our patients fit into this category, right? I mean, if you've ever tried to just change a habit, whether it be to lose weight or eat healthier, but even like something as simple as like flossing your teeth, changing behaviors is really, really hard. And then we do have that negative self-talk of like, oh, I suck at this. I can't do this. Like, this is impossible, So I think it is, like you said, that vicious cycle. But what is the opposite of limiting beliefs?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good question, because I don't know that there's like a universal term for the opposite of limiting beliefs. When we're addressing limiting beliefs in practice, we talk about reframing those limiting beliefs. So spinning them to be more positive. What you might say instead of a limiting belief, I guess if you want to technically find the opposite, would be something like an empowering belief or an abundant belief, maybe. I think the practitioner could come up with their own way to say it. But either way, it's a spin on whatever that belief is that's holding you back. So some examples I thought of would be, okay, if your limiting belief is I can't control myself with snacks at night, then you might reframe that belief to be something like, I can create an environment that supports mindful eating, even at night, or I can build healthier habits over time, even if it feels hard right now. So you find whatever that belief is and find a way to fix it so that you feel empowered or able to make the change. And then the more you think that, the more you talk to yourself like that, the more you can trust that that's true. And then it just becomes your reality.
That's really, really helpful. And there is so much science behind like positive reinforcement, positive language for yourself, just internally or even saying it out loud. So I love that reframe. I watch a lot of obviously like podcast growth stuff, and they name it having a growth mindset. So different for like nutrition or weight loss, but it is kind of that's positive, right? You want to have growth, or I do with my podcast. And so it is that positive reframe. So you're not just stuck in the negative all the time. Okay, I love those examples that you gave, but I would love to hear, how do you think clinicians can help the patient identify their limiting belief and then address it? Like, what are the questions that we need to be asking our patients to pull it out of them?
Well, one thing that I think is really important for clinicians is to get comfortable not having an in the moment quick fix solution. A lot of times these conversations that I have with clients come out over the course of a nutrition session or over the course of maybe even a couple. First, as the clinician, you're asking open-ended questions, things like, why do you think that's true? Is there a way that you could think about that differently? Especially if it's someone that you're with long standing, a primary care physician might see the same person year after year, and they're struggling with the same thing year after year. So if you can remember that as the clinician, you can say, it seems like you've been struggling with this for a while. Would you be willing to try something different? Or how might we look at this differently? So having a couple of those key questions in your pocket that you can pay attention and plug them in could be the driver or the spark of the conversation. And then when they're ready, when you get to that point of the conversation, the reframe process looks something like this. First, we need to figure out what those limiting beliefs are. And again, this might not happen in the appointment. What I'll recommend clients do is, okay, over the next day, over the next week, take some time to jot down those thoughts that keep coming up when you think about meal planning or think about exercise. And then once you have your list, take some time again throughout the week and see if there are any common threads. Once you have a couple of those, then you start challenging those beliefs. And you as the patient start asking yourself, why do I think this is true? Is there any truth to it? And again, what might be a different way to look at this? You go back to those examples of reframing. I can create an environment, even if it's hard or even at night.
If you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I need more of this mindset stuff in my practice, I've got something for you. Inside my obesity medicine nutrition course, I'll show you exactly how to help your patients set realistic goals, change their habits, and actually stick with them. This is more than a course. It's a supportive community that's going to walk you through everything you need to know about nutrition and weight management to help your patients thrive. Oh, and did I mention that you get continuing education credits too? If this sounds like something you need in your life, head to examroomnutrition.com/course or check the links in the show notes to learn more and sign up.
One tool that I actually think is really helpful is ChatGPT. If you just plug into ChatGPT, what are some ways that I can reframe this limiting belief? It will come up with several options for you. And then you just decide which one resonates with you the most. And you repeat that each time you notice yourself spinning in that limiting belief that you came up with to start with.
I like your approach of giving the patient an assignment. I think this is such a great thing. And it also takes that pressure away from you to solve that issue right then and there. Because like you said in the beginning, you might not get to the solution of this in 10 minutes, which that is so rare. Like you said, if it's an hour session, you maybe get down to it, but it's usually after 2 or 3 visits with the patient to where you really get to know them. They're opening up to you and really helping, and you're helping them address these challenges. So I really like assigning patients tasks to do at home, because then they're in the comfort of their home, they're quiet, maybe they're having their coffee, and they can really reflect on their challenges. So that was really, really helpful.
I think another important thing to know to go along with what you're saying is it will be much more powerful for our patients to figure out what is the limiting belief that they recognize for themselves. And even if it's 5 limiting beliefs, which one is the most important to them to focus on first? Because of course we know that working on one small habit at a time is going to be much more sustainable than working on 5 different habits at a time. So if I say, it sounds like you're struggling with meal planning, let's unpack what that is. But they don't necessarily care about meal planning yet. They would rather focus on getting more water in and what's holding them back for that. It will be much more powerful and helpful for them to figure out that and come up with something that, again, that resonates with them than it will be for me to assign the limiting belief and the reframed belief.
Oh, I'm really glad you brought that up because it's just like when we try to create a goal for a patient, right? I find that a lot of clinicians, if the patient says, oh, I want to lose weight, and we just like, here, eat more fruits and veggies, here, drink more water, as opposed to like, well, what things do you want to work on? And as humans, none of us like to be told what to do. A lot of us, and most of us, will do it if we come up with it and if it fits and aligns with our lifestyle and schedule and preferences. So that's a really, really good point, Emily, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Okay, so we've talked about beliefs. We started with a limiting belief. We've kind of wrestled through that. Maybe we have a reframe into things that we can say to kind of flip it to be a little bit more positive and empowering. But now, how do we take that belief and turn it into actions? And how can we help our patients kind of take that next step?
There is an acronym, BTFAR, which stands for belief, thoughts, feelings, actions, results. And this is the pathway that gets anyone from that underlying belief all the way to the results of whatever that belief feeds to, for better or for worse. And each step reinforces the original beliefs and maybe keeps you in the same cycle or helps you grow beyond that cycle. So it could play out like this. If you believe healthy eating is hard and unsustainable, the thoughts that might pop into your head are, I don't have time to meal prep like other people. And so when it comes to meal prepping, you will feel overwhelmed, frustrated, discouraged, those kinds of things. Then results in the action of skipping meal prep entirely, ordering takeout, deciding to delay your healthy eating plans or your meal prepping plans until things are more convenient. And then the results of that are you feel unhealthy, you feel guilty because you couldn't follow through on meal prepping like you wanted to. Again, these things reinforce the belief that healthy eating is hard and unsustainable. So I think explaining, even just very briefly, the fact that what you believe feeds your actions, feeds your results, can be helpful for clients to know, okay, I am not able to lose weight, but if I work backwards, I can see that my actions are not leading me to lose weight. Okay, well, what's feeding the actions? Because I do want to lose weight. I feel overwhelmed and frustrated. I feel like I don't belong at the gym. I feel all these things. So being able to figure out, okay, if we can address the deepest part of that limiting belief, it'll be that much easier to change the actions, change the ending result to get you where you want to go.
Okay, Emily, I'm a sucker for a good acronym. I don't know if it's the PA school or what, but acronyms are so helpful. I think they're brilliant. They're really easy to remember. So I want to linger here for a little bit. Can you just say the acronym and the words that it stands for one more time for my listeners?
Of course. BTFAR is the acronym, which stands for beliefs, thoughts, feelings, action, and results.
Okay. So I see so many ways that we can actually use this with a patient. And yeah, it could probably be done in over an hour, but I honestly see how you could write this down on a piece of paper with your patient, even assign this to them to maybe fill it out and work through it. And then they come back and we can go over it with them. I can kind of foresee you working forwards, right? From the B to the R, or maybe even backwards as a way to like see where they're stumbling. But I'm curious, have you ever worked with it in a positive way to show like, hey, like if you have this, empowerment mindset, these are the snowball effects and this is how we can get you to your results? Or do you usually use it to pull out their limiting beliefs and to show them how it's negatively affecting them?
I will a lot of times compare this to like a financial picture or a small business picture, or what's the goal that you've been working for? You can see how your motivation there, your excitement, your drive there can be traced back to the beliefs that you had around that goal. So another thing I tell people too is you work as a CEO, you're a successful business person or whatever in your day job. So you have these transferable skills. We tend to not think about how our work lives can be applied to our health goals. But if it's true that you can be successful and organized and diligent with your work, it should be true too that you can be successful and organized and diligent towards your health goals. So let's take some of those skills and apply them to this area that is so tricky for so many people. You are able to do it. You are capable of doing it. Let's just figure out how it works in the health sphere.
I love that you remind them that they are capable. You just have to find the right tools to do this work as opposed to what you're already really successful in. So I love that acronym. I think that is a really, really helpful thing for providers to start to incorporate in their practice. Now, you and I love mindset and this strategy with communication, but I'm sure I have some listeners who might be a little skeptical, those ones who are much more logical and just like the facts. So, what are some practical ways that maybe that listener can start to integrate these concepts that we've talked about into their conversations with their patients?
I would start by saying that most people are skeptical about this work. Most people are skeptical about how mindset will help them meal prep. Maybe not so much for weight loss or something like that, or exercise. I think those big goals, people think, oh yeah, well, if I'm excited about it, if I'm motivated, I'll be able to do it. But the nitty-gritty details, I don't think many people think mindset. So as a clinician, if you think this is just kind of mumbo jumbo, maybe take a step back and remember that our goal as providers is to, one, help our clients succeed. And a lot of times that just comes from getting curious about ourselves, about our practice, about what's really going to help our patients thrive. And let's just pick one or two questions that you can work into your practice, something really open-ended that's going to get your clients to start talking. So something like, how can you think about this situation differently? Another thing that I said already was, it sounds like you've been working at this for a while, or we keep coming back to this struggle. I think you might even be frustrated at this point. Would you be open to trying something different? Or how could we think about this differently?
I think you guys need to copy paste and put them in your phone, write them on a sticky note in every single one of your exam rooms, because it's just such a great open-ended question and probably something that your patient's never been asked before. And this really does help them dig deep and focus on what they've been struggling with and why is it so hard. And something that I always go back to is when you ask good questions that make the patient talk and make the patient work through things, it completely relieves you of that burden of figuring it out, because your patient is just figuring it out. And then, like you said, you can just empower and reflect back the things that they had said. So I feel as though that is a great strategy to prevent burnout, so you don't feel like you have to solve all of the patient's problems.
I'm sure you've heard too the joke of, nutrition counseling has a lot of therapy mixed in, and clients will tell me, you're not a therapist, but, and then they go into something really complicated. And again, that's important to remember that none of these things are isolated. Your medication issues, your lifestyle challenges, none of these are isolated issues. And if we can, again, get your client to start talking, you can see into their life a little bit more and figure out how all these things connect. Just remembering, if there's a way that you can see the whole picture better and do a little bit of therapy, which by that I mean, like you said, just listening, sitting back and listening, you can see some connection points that you may have missed if you instead focus on do this, don't do this kind of strategy.
Now, you've mentioned a little bit about the importance of clinicians acknowledging this strategy and maybe even doing this kind of work on themselves. And so I'd love for you to help us understand how we can reflect on maybe our own limiting beliefs and how this might improve the care that we provide.
If you are skeptical, I'd encourage you to just take a minute and reflect on how effective the eat this, not that, or do this, not that, how effective have those recommendations really been for your clients? Probably sometimes they're helpful, and a lot of times they just kind of fall flat. It's typically not a knowledge issue. It's the follow through. And another thing to reflect on might be if you were the patient in that scenario and someone tells you, eat more vegetables, move more, drink your water, would you feel excited by that? Would you feel enlightened? Or would you kind of roll your eyes and think, yeah, I already know that. That's not going to help me. I've already tried that. So the self-reflection piece, it gives you the opportunity to put yourself in those shoes and think, are my current recommendations really helpful? Or is there a different way that I could approach this so that my clients are going to be helped?
I'm sitting here thinking that this can be used in any age population. I land in the pediatric space, and probably 90% of my parents that come in and do a well check, when we talk about nutrition, their number one thing is that little Johnny, little Susie is very picky. Hands down, I can always expect that as an answer. And I think a good example of, I would just say, oh, just keep giving him a variety of foods. He'll come around, as opposed to asking the mom, right? This is that reflection. Well, why do you think that is? Or if she says, I hate family meals, I can't get meals on the table, as opposed to me saying, well, but they're really, really important for your child. This will help them eat more fruits and vegetables. I can just ask, like, why? What is going on that's preventing you from doing this? That reflection really helps them problem solve the situation. And I think that's such a more helpful approach than just, saying, oh, we'll do this. Half the time they're like, I'm already doing that. And now
Right.
you have to backtrack and try to brainstorm and figure it out when you could have just asked a better question in the first place.
Right. And even if they don't come up with something, a solution in the moment, you just let it simmer a little bit, and they might come back to you next time and say, okay, once you said that, then I started to notice these different things that were really playing into my stress at mealtime.
That's a really good point, that the things that we say can plant little seeds later on when things are quiet and kids are in bed. Okay, so maybe we've got patients, and I know a lot of us have them, who are really tricky and say, no, this mindset stuff is just ridiculous. It's not going to work for me. It's my hormones. My hormones are messed up, or my cortisol levels are just through the roof, and I just need you to fix me. How would you approach these tricky patients who are really, really skeptical about that connection between mindset and their ability to change or maintain those healthy habits? What can we say to kind of move them along onto our side here?
So one of my favorite clients, she's in her mid 40s. She used to be really active, but now has a desk job. And she came to me for weight loss. And when I kind of floated the idea of, let's look at some of the background things that might be going on, she played along. But the second visit, she ended up telling me that she ended up trying intermittent fasting, and it just was not enjoyable. It didn't work for her. And it was almost like coming to the breaking point. She had spent her life being able to be active. Now that she's in her 40s, things slowed down, metabolism changed. And she realized that the things that she used to do weren't working anymore. Maybe because of age, maybe because of hormones, maybe because of all of these different factors. And at that point, when she was confronted with reality, she thought, okay, maybe I will try something different. Maybe there's something to this. I think with the people who are especially skeptical, know that it's not necessarily a quick fix, as nothing is when it comes to health. All of this is a long-term game. And a lot of times I will tell people, my goal is not to get you results in 3 months. Maybe that happens, but my biggest thing is to get you an eating plan or some healthy habits that you're going to be able to sustain long-term. And if intermittent fasting is it for you, then great. But if it's not, then let's try something else.
What about if they're just like, I can't, it's just my body. They're just really resistant and, the quote non-compliant patients. Is there a approach that you take with them, or maybe one that you recommend against? Should we just like leave it alone and just move on to something else? Or how would you consider that?
I think this is where the marriage of talking about mindset and limiting beliefs and addressing the elephant in the room come into play. So most clients, again, know that they should be eating fruits and vegetables. They should be moving. They should be sleeping. And so if I have a client who's especially tricky and says, I've tried it, it doesn't work, I'm trying it, I can't stick with it, I'm just not losing the weight, then, okay, well then let's really analyze what you're doing. Tell me about a regular day in your life. And I want to know about the food that you're eating, but I also want to know about your work schedule. I want to know about your family life. I want to know about how active you are. Let's unpack that. Maybe we can figure out a sticking point. Maybe we can figure out where there's an issue and address that head on. Because if it's not the mindset, if it's not the belief that you can or can't do it, then it probably is something really practical. And I at least want to rule out the fact that it's not. And a lot of times we do come up with, okay, we're not getting the basics down. So if we can show that we're not getting the basics down, then we can address why aren't we getting the basics down? Maybe you really don't have time to meal prep because you have 3 kids and they're all in sports and fast food or takeout is just easier. Okay, that might be true. Is there a way that we can figure out healthy snack options for on the go that don't require any prep? Or is there a way that we can find healthy options at those restaurants, even if all you can do is the drive through? So, though I might not be saying there's a limiting belief here, I can't eat healthy if I'm eating out, I'm going to go in the back door and say, let's address this belief that you can't eat healthy when you're eating out.
I really like how you zoom out. Maybe the patient's getting confrontational. You can tell in their body language, they're just like irritated with like what you're trying to do. And you took a step back. Okay, you know what? Let's really dive into your food, your sleep, your stress, your movement. Let's look at all of that stuff. And I would be happy to give you some suggestions there. And what that does is you can find an issue because none of us are perfect. Even if you and I were to work with a dietitian, she's going to find some loopholes and some gray areas that I could improve on. And what you do as the professional is you find it, and then there's likely a limiting belief linked to that. So I think that's a really fascinating way to reframe and address their concern while at the same time sort of working on that mindset. Like you said, that backdoor approach. I think that's really, really smart. Plus, patients want practical, like, tell me, what do I do? Right. So in a way, you are giving them that. Like, okay, you have to go to McDonald's. What are some healthier options? They do sometimes need that type of assistance. But like you've been saying, a lot of it is just tied into a limiting belief that they just aren't aware of yet.
And that gets to the mindset stuff without them having to do the assignment, because not everybody's going to be willing to journal or write down their thoughts all day long.
Yep. No, you're totally right. And I'm thinking about my dad. He would never do any of this deep work, but in talking, you could kind of pull it out of him. So I agree with you that it might not work for everybody, but there are some strategies and some things that you can kind of pull out to still give the patient really good advice. Emily, this conversation has been so fun, and I'm hoping that my listeners have learned a new tactic that they can use with their quote tricky patients and maybe adjust their approach to giving nutrition advice that's a little bit more exciting than saying, hey, just don't eat this and eat this. So I've really, really enjoyed our conversation. Now, if someone wanted to connect with you or learn more about you and from you, where could they do that?
You can find me and follow me at Pass the Chia, like chia seeds, on Instagram. I am actually starting a little series of worth it recipes. So like those healthified recipes, are they worth it? So follow along and see if it's worth a cottage cheese dessert. And you can also find me at my website at passthechia.com and email me with any questions that you might have, passthechia@gmail.com.
So fun. What a cute name. I love it. I love that series. So I'll definitely be following along as well. All of her links will be down in the show notes for you guys to get connected with Emily. Thank you so much for the gift of your time. I know you're a busy mom, so I appreciate you being here.
Of course, Colleen, this is so much fun. Thanks for having me.
All right, now it's time for my nutrition notes. So why do people fail when they go on a diet anyways? Well, the answer varies, but I believe it often comes down to 3 big reasons. First one, they set overly ambitious goals. The ones at the new year, like I want to lose 20 pounds in 2 weeks, or I'm going vegan, I'm quitting sugar, and I'm getting off all of my meds. These unrealistic expectations can lead to quick disappointment when progress stalls or life gets in the way. Second reason is they fail to plan for those obstacles. Because honestly, life doesn't run on a perfect meal plan. Work deadlines, last minute dinners, stress, kids, birthday parties, all of it can derail even the most motivated patient if they don't have a plan for navigating those moments. And third, they use food as a coping mechanism. Stress, boredom, sadness, celebration are all emotions that patients often try to soothe with food. And if we don't help them find a new coping strategy, they'll keep turning to that nightly bag of chips or pint of ice cream. Not because they're hungry, but because they're hurting or celebrating. So what can we do? First, we need to drop the assumption that our patients are lazy or non-compliant. Instead, we just need to assume the best in our patients, assume they want to be successful, and that something is just getting in the way of that. And before handing them over another diet or meal plan, take a breath and ask this simple, powerful question. What is making this hard for you? I learned this question from a former guest on the podcast, Laura Caller, and it is one of my favorite questions to ask my patients because the answer might surprise you and it'll give you way more insight than any food log ever could. So the next time your patient seems to be non-compliant, just pause and ask them, hey, what's going on? Why is this so hard for you? I've had so many of these conversations over the years, and I started collecting the most common things people say when they talk about their diets. And let me tell you, it's almost always negative, but that's where the mindset shift comes in. Oprah once said, the greatest discovery of all time is that a person can change their future by merely changing their attitude. And I love that. So if you want to dig deeper into this topic of mindset, you'll love episode 45. In it, I actually walk through 10 mindset shifts that can help patients stop beating themselves up and start talking about their goals in a healthier, more empowering way. I think it would be a great follow-up to this episode, so go check out episode 45, and I will link to it in the show notes. These simple reframes can help patients stay more consistent with their habits and feel hopeful again about making progress. Well, thanks again for being here. If you loved this episode, share it with a colleague or tag me on Instagram at Exam Room Nutrition. And as always, let's continue to make our patients healthier, one exam room at a time. I'll see you next time.